I'm Nicole from Birth into Being. It is my pleasure to present to you today a little bit of information about limbic imprinting and where it fits in with pregnancy and preparation for birth. So the Birth into Being method is a healing modality based upon the concepts of limbic imprinting. It was devised by Elena Taneti Vladimirova, who was one of the midwives in the Black Sea birth camps, working alongside Igor Tchaikovsky in the very early 80s. Elena made a film called Birth as We Know It that a lot of you may have seen. It has some very memorable birth scenes of babies being born in the Black Sea, of little children swimming with dolphins, women emerging from the ocean with their babies in their arms. It's extremely memorable, and it was an amazing film that was quite a catalyst in the sort of expansion of the concepts of conscious birth. So Elena devised the Birth into Being method and developed it when she came to America, and I learnt from her. My first training with her was in 2009, and so I've been in cahoots, as we say, for over 15 years now, and Elena is stepping back a little bit from her role in training other people in the Birth into Being method, so that's where I come in. And I also love to share about it in birth circles and other parts of society where it's relevant for people to really understand how important our birth imprints are. So yeah, my name's Nicole. I am Australian. I do Birth into Being workshops kind of all over the place, especially after being held back for a while with COVID. No holding back anymore. I'm off to Sweden tomorrow and Italy the next week. And yeah, I am a mother. I am a gardener. I am a filmmaker. I am a performing artist. I do improvised theatre, and I am a practitioner and a healer that works closely with the Birth into Being method in my offerings. I do online sessions and all sorts of different things. So limbic imprinting and pregnancy and birth preparation. So one of the places that I really love to start is with this fabulous image from this wonderful book by Lennart Nielsen. Lennart Nielsen was, I think, Swedish, actually. Swedish or Danish or something. Photographer. Not a birth photographer, but he devised this system of taking photographs in utero. And they were on the cover of Time magazine for many years. Very famous images. Almost as famous and almost as consciousness shifting as the photographs of the Earth that were taken from the moon, and all of a sudden everybody had this shift in consciousness. Likewise with these images, when we can see the origins of life with our own two eyes, we can somehow relate more. Anyway, in relation to limbic imprinting, this is a 5-week-old embryo. We can see that the brain is not anywhere near developed, but the spinal cord, and what we now know is the whole polyvagal system that stems off from the spinal cord, and it is its own system of feeling and sensing apparatus, that is already well underway. The limbic system in the center of the brain has already started at 5 weeks. But the cortex, the part of the brain, that we most often associate with brains, is not yet there. But what it means is that this development is all happening while the embryo is inside their mother. They are completely defenseless to whatever is happening for the mother. Not only are they affected by it, but they are developing in response to it. So what that means is that this period of life is extremely important and influential on who we are and what we become. So when we know that, not only does it make it more important for pregnant women to, really prioritize their own self-care and their own well-being, to create the bubble for themselves and care for their baby, and hopefully that information can also help other people to understand the importance of this primary foundational period for the baby and the mother. Obviously, it's important for the mother for her own reasons, but also because if she is having a really high propensity to producing cortisol, the stress hormone, then she's not producing as much oxytocin, the hormone of love, and they don't really play together very well. One tends to cancel out the other. And if the mother is having a high amount of cortisol, then she's not getting the oxytocin, and then the baby, in that very delicate and vulnerable state, is also not developing the receptors for oxytocin. Because oxytocin is not only a hormone, it's also a neurotransmitter. So very important that we care for our pregnant mothers in that phase of life and our unborn children. But that information about how we ourselves were formed, how our neurobiology was formed, is also very interesting when we look at that from the perspective of being a pregnant woman. What are the imprints that we received around conception, gestation, and birth as a baby ourselves? What are those imprints, and what can we do about them if we don't want them to be handed on to our children? Another little thing that I like to share here is this is my little friend, the brain. This is the cortex that we were talking about before, the reptilian brain and the limbic system. So if you align this picture with what you saw of the embryo, and you see that the limbic system was developing first, well before the cortex. Now, insurance companies, at least here in Australia, and I think most of the Western world, charge higher rates for young people to be insured than older people. And that's because they say that this cortex doesn't fully develop until you're 25 years of age. So that's pretty interesting. It's a long journey for the cortex. But for the limbic system, it is receiving and absorbing information right from the get-go. And how that relates to a woman either preparing for conception or preparing for birth and, wanting to understand her pregnancy, it's important for her to think about her imprints. What are the imprints of life from her earliest time in utero? What was her mother experiencing or doing when she was pregnant with her? It's a pretty fascinating field of inquiry, because it filters out into all sorts of things around social paradigm, war times, the status quo, if it was post-war and people were possibly in a celebratory phase, and so there was lots of conceptions, but was there an underlying fear? Was there still some degree of poverty that the pregnant women had to nurture themselves, even though the country was still getting itself back on its feet? There's lots of different ways that we can use the understanding of limbic imprinting to understand ourselves better. And not just ourselves as individuals, but ourselves as a collective. So we know that, I think it was the late 1950s, there was a lot of drugs being used to experiment with pregnancies, and a lot of them were found to be problematic and withdrawn from the market. There were things like Twilight, being used so that people didn't actually remember their birth experiences at all. And this kind of stuff can be tracked socially. Elena talks about the environment in Russia where water birth actually became a possibility, and it's because people were prepared to try something as radical as giving birth in water, because they the alternative of being giving birth in a birth house where there was absolutely zero care and the little babies were given sedatives, and that alternative was so bad and so unappealing that it gave women this kind of edge to go, well, try water birth. And that began in Moscow, and then as time went by, they ended up doing these Black Sea birth camps where women could under the care of Igor Tchaikovsky, could give birth in the ocean. I'm hesitating there because I'm realizing I said under the care of Igor Tchaikovsky. There were also a bunch of midwives and organizers and people who were running those birth camps. So not to take away from their roles, because I'm sure that was quite pivotal in whether or not it actually happened. So when a woman understands that the way that she was born and came into the world has a direct influence on how she too births her baby, or that it can have that kind of an influence, then she can work with that, actively work with that. So if, for example, her whole childhood she heard stories about how her mother was doing fine, but then the doctor came in the room and she had to do what the doctor said, and she became completely disempowered and ended up with birth interventions that she didn't want. Very basic story. Then that woman can say to herself, well, there's a loss of power there. My mother was doing fine, enjoying her experience, feeling confident, and somewhere along the line there was a loss of power, and then a cascade of interventions. And they can look at themselves and their own life and say, well, is that something that I relate to? Are there places in my life where I lose my power? Are there times in my pregnancy where I'm losing my power? And can I look at this as an energetic pattern and get really familiar with it, have it become known to the self, so that if it shows up again in labour, she can say, ha ha ha, you, my old friend, powerlessness. I know you, and I'm still going to keep on breathing and birthing my baby. So, the other way that the limbic imprint travels through generations of women is because of the way that women talk and tell stories. They share birth stories with each other. There will become a kind of modus operandi of this is how the women in the, Dior family give birth. Don't know where that came from, Dior. But it's very, you can see how there are many ways that generational birthing patterns and generational trauma plays out in cycles. The storytelling, the sort of modus operandi, this is birth. There is a kind of, a way of communicating about birth that travels through female lineages, and a woman can find herself pregnant and almost doing battle with these imprints of the generations past. When she knows and understands that there is even such a thing as imprints, then she can take conscious steps to separate herself from that energetic pattern. And that might mean watching a whole lot of birth movies, seeking out stories that are the antidote to the kind of stories that she's been told all her life. It might mean, participating in the community of women who have birthed very differently to that. So I know that in my own home birth journeys, my midwife was very, very much cultivated a community amongst the women who were birthing with her. So we had a home birth group that all of the women would attend. She would have, little afternoon tea parties and get together with a bunch of women, making sure that women who knew, or women who were, birthing around the same time would get to know each other, because she knew that they would eventually have little toddlers who need someone to play with. And, so she was very good at cultivating that community. But on one level, it was all, just yummy, juicy, very feminine ways of connecting with each other. And on the other hand, it was very specifically devised by her, knowing that many of us that were choosing home birth and choosing to give birth, without interventions, were not actually born that way ourselves. We did not have an internal reference point for what birth can be when it's, at home, undisturbed, no interventions. Everything is left to kind of, play out in its own divine timing. She knew that we didn't necessarily have reference points for that. So mixing with each other and hearing the different birth stories from all the different women was a really fabulous way of creating that internal reference points for healthy, undisturbed birth. And then, with the birth into being method, we have a very cultivated, a very curated experience of giving birth and being born. It's kind of simultaneous. It operates simultaneously for pregnant women. Having an experience of coming into the world gently, in love, surrounded by, supportive, wonderful community, bringing food and caring for each other. It creates an internal reference point for that to play out in real life. And so the way that we do that with the birth into being method is by creating a whole bunch of little steps first to allow the person to, relax, feel safe, open up. If it's a group session, then, be with the group, start to regulate the nervous system. These lovely people. That one's not so friendly, but, slowly relaxing into the space. Sharing some of their own stories. So again, another little micro opening experience. And then we do a lot of work with breath, movement, sound, and creating an environment where we feel completely ready to open to a new experience. And the facilitator creates and provides that based on what they've heard so far from the group. So the group, the opening circle, there may have been instances of an absent father. I mean, I'm talking about this in a very blasé way. And I hope that you can understand that I am deeply sympathetic and compassionate to all of these stories, but there are some stories that show up again and again in circles and in groups of women. And so, I'm being flippant, but I do understand that each one of these things that I mention are deeply meaningful and can actually inform somebody's whole life. And that's exactly why I do this work, is because I do care very deeply that so many of us as humans did not receive the birth experiences that would have actually helped us to be the people we want to be able to work together and care for each other and our earth and to parent well and all the rest. So, in a circle, there may be people who have, for example, an absent father, or they were removed at birth and spent time alone before being reunited with their parents. They may have had an emergency situation unfold, or a contrived emergency, but somehow or other their natural birth was interrupted and they may have been removed via cesarean. Now, very common question here is that, is a cesarean birth always a negative imprint? And no, it's not. Just because you're not getting all of those lovely physiological things that come with a physiological birth, it doesn't mean that it's always a negative imprint. First of all, because there's amazing things happening these days with gentle cesareans. So, if a cesarean is necessary and that's what ends up happening, there can still be steps taken to reunite the baby with their mother immediately. Perhaps the father is available for skin to skin, or the other parent. And there's so many different ways that you can make a cesarean more gentle. And that is happening quite a lot. I'm even aware of cesarean-born babies who are able to keep their placenta attached until it's ready to come off. So lotus birth, lotus cesarean births. But the thing that I wanted to say is that a cesarean birth does not necessarily imply a negative imprint. The imprint may be that help comes when help is needed. So, there's all sorts of different ways that different imprints can be interpreted, and it's really up to the individual and their felt sense of how this is playing out in their life and what it can mean for them. So let's go back to, there's a bunch of people in the room and they've all got different stories. The absent father, the emergency cesarean, the removal into ICU, the girl that was expected to be a boy but turned out to be a girl, the baby that was born, the day after the birthing mother's father died. There's all these different stories, and they happen again and again. You see them quite commonly in groups. And what the facilitator can do is tailor the recoding exercise to the things that have shown up in the group. And that's why this work is amazing when you do it one-on-one as well, because you can really tailor the experience to be exactly what the person needs. So some gaps might open up in terms of, I really needed this and I didn't get it, or, I've always felt like I wanted more touch, or whatever. And you can feed that into the participants or the client. And it's an amazing way of being able to create the reference point that you were not lucky enough to receive in real life. And when a person is doing this kind of a process with an open heart and an open mind and, some degree of enthusiasm for having some input into their own life, and they are, open and receptive, not kind of, skeptical and suspicious, then they can really take in these experiences, and it creates like a parallel experience for the nervous system. The same way that when we watch a film or go to the theatre, we know it's not real, but it still feels real. We still cry and sweat and have an experience. We have an emotional response to what we're seeing on the screen or on the stage. And we may even remember those emotional experiences for many, many years to come. And this is how limbic imprint recoding also really works for us, because we are inviting the experience in. We've done a whole bunch of steps first to disinhibit the mind, and then we are calling in an experience. And then we take some time after that whole process has taken place. It is quite a long process. I like to allow at least 2 hours, more if it's in groups, because you need time to hear from everybody and everybody to kind of relax, arrive, be in the environment, feel safe, get ready to, lie down. And so it's quite a long process. And at the end, we also need to allow lots of time for people to come back gently, so that they can move between their adult self that is inviting that experience in and the child self or baby self that is in the process, and to breathe through these two experiences. And kind of, it's almost like you're building a muscle. And then, as time goes by, every time you revisit that experience, you are activating that muscle, you are exercising the new imprint. When you remember how good it felt to emerge into your mother's loving arms in an environment where birth was considered safe, and whatever the juicy bits are for you, as time goes by and you recall those experiences, you are actually cultivating a new imprint in your mind. And it's fascinating, because with an imprint of arriving into the world gently, in love, with no interventions, no stress, no drama, completely safe, held, both parents present, accepted utterly and completely for who you are, that changes something on a pivotal level. It doesn't take much for, one small change to then ripple out into the world and create other movements, shall we say. Other people perceiving you differently, you perceiving things differently, not feeling so guarded or distrustful, being quite relaxed. It allows more creative energy to flow. It allows love and freedom and all these wonderful qualities that we say we want. But because our imprints are something else, we may end up being more guarded than we really want to be. Our default settings, our initial imprints, created those default settings. But when we are able to consciously create and invite in other settings, ones that are juicy and abundant and inviting in love and safety. Safety is the bottom line all the way along. It creates change. It creates ripple effects and change. And it's really quite amazing. And the wonderful thing is that not only does it create change for us, but also for other subsequent generations. When a woman does this work in preparation for her own birth of her baby, so she's processing her own birth as a person, as a baby herself, in preparation for birthing her children, she is effectively shifting those generational patterns of how birth is, of trauma, of, maybe lack, or when I think about the examples that I gave before of wartime, of fear and survival instincts being kind of, really present. When a woman does all that work beforehand and then births her baby in a state of calm, blissful, welcome, very, very generous environment, where that baby can be completely honoured and welcomed for who they are, that changes things for generations. It changes things for her baby, and for her baby's babies. Because as we know, if that baby is a girl, then it's got eggs already for its child to be. Yeah. So when we do a process like that and someone is pregnant, it's very, very hard for them, unless they're in the very early stages of pregnancy, it can be quite difficult for them to focus on themselves as the baby. They tend to sort of jump between, I'm the birthing mother and I'm the baby, and it's this kind of merging of selves, which is actually quite beautiful because, like I said, we're influencing the entire trajectory of our descendants. And what's wonderful about that is that, we're also influencing the trajectory to the past. So I'm not going to play around with moving the camera. I thought it's easier to move the dolls. These Matryoshka dolls might be very familiar to all of you, and we use them in the Birth into Being method to introduce various concepts. Obviously, generational trauma, generational birthing patterns is demonstrated by this. But it's also about really coming to understand the many different layers of our being. So when we start to look at our imprints, not only are we coming at that from an intellectual point of view and because we want to do something to make things better for our baby, but it also helps us to be really compassionate and understanding towards ourselves. Because then we understand that no matter how big we are, no matter how many children we've already had, or how, out in the world we are, there are layers to our being. And our own little baby self is still alive and well inside of us. And when we do exercises like the limbic imprint recoding exercise, and we have direct emotional contact with our baby self, it is so informative as a parent. So informative, because we understand then that the longing that a baby feels to be touched gently, to be cared for with love, to be seen in their development as they grow older, to be accepted, when all the physical changes come in adolescence, to be revered as the divine feminine. All of this stuff gets touched through this kind of a limbic imprint recoding exercise. It's such a mouthful. Limbic imprint recoding. And when a woman is having contact, emotional, intellectual, empathetic contact with all these different parts of herself, then when she is approaching labour and, strong sensations start to kick in, Maybe there's a bit of emotional turmoil, which there often is with the extended family. You know, the mother-in-law wants to come into the birth room, the birthing mother doesn't want that, she has to say no, and then she gets upset because she feels like she's not being a good girl, or that she won't be accepted. All of this stuff can and does come up throughout pregnancy, especially as you start to approach labour, and it can come up in labour itself as well and slow things down while Mama Bear is, you know, dealing with it and trying her best to process it. And the thing is that if she has become familiar throughout her pregnancy with these different parts of herself, then when they do show up, there is nothing to push back against, nothing to reject or to fight against. And, you know, there may even have been some skill development around, for example, learning how to speak up, learning how to, you know, truly express oneself, how to value your own needs. You know, like there's a lot of different ways that meeting yourself can really, really help you in the labour room. And of course, it's not about having a fast labour, but it's definitely about not being stuck there so long that, you know, the authorities are called or that you need to, you know, have interventions. So, yeah, there is our Matryoshka dolls. We use them a lot because it's such a beautiful metaphor. And these are unpainted. I'm preparing a workshop where we get to craft and move through the different elements of our female lineage that may be supporting or not supporting us. And yeah, looking forward to bringing that one to various communities. So yeah, we meet our inner child through the limbic imprint recoding exercise. As I said, this has many positive implications for enjoying the pregnancy, for, you know, really gleaning all the personal growth that is possible in pregnancy. It's such a transformative time. Yeah. And then the other way that we meet our inner child is for women to sometimes use, many times I've used cushions, but I now have this beautiful baby. This is Vivian. Vivian has an umbilicus and a placenta that can come off. Vivian is handmade with love, weighted with crystals, every stitch done by hand, made by a beautiful Australian woman. I can't remember her Instagram name right now, but it's on my profile. You can scroll back and you'll see when I first got Vivian, and I've tagged the lady in there. Kira Lee is her name, but that's not her Instagram name, so yeah. But having a little baby to hold and touch and be with is often very, very healing for women, and it creates this kind of rich thread like what is represented by the Matryoshka dolls. A very rich thread of female lineage and of love and support and care. And again, it's so sad, but in our culture, many, many, many people missed out on that in their baby years, throughout their whole life. But when they are either approaching conception or pregnant, very often these sadnesses and griefs and unmet needs are all rising to the surface because that mother and, you know, her birthing partner are very often really adamant that they do not want to bring the same injuries through to their babies. So we meet them in our Birth into Being workshops. They are the kind of people who are really receptive to our work and who are wanting to do something about their own imprints before they bring a baby in. And so having an actual physical baby to cuddle and hold can be really, really deeply healing. Much more than it looks like this. You know, it's kind of just when someone is feeling that, you know, that desperate ache to be held themselves as a baby, and then they are able to offer that to the dolly. Again, it's the use of touch, a multi-sensory approach that actually brings these sensations into the body. It's another reason why we love to do the Birth into Being work in groups, is because there is then the possibility for a lot of touch, which is very, very healing. And yeah, I do work with self-touch for my online clients, but it's not the same. Sadly. Yeah. So, yeah. I might just have a quick look at my notes. I've been talking for 41 minutes without looking at them. So I might just see what I've forgotten. Because there are very often the same questions are asked again and again. So I have a list here of the questions that people like to ask. Just checking what I have addressed and not addressed. So how do we know when we're operating out of an imprint? When we have disproportionately large reactions or responses to an event, you know, big emotional activations around something that is a current event and isn't sort of like such a big deal, but some part of us thinks it is a really big deal, that is generally a sign that there's an imprint there that could be looked at and tenderly held. Yeah. All beings are imprinted. So some people say, you know, oh, well, I had a fabulous birth and a fabulous childhood and I don't have any imprints that need addressing. Yes, all beings are imprinted, all living beings. And I'll give an example in a minute, but it can always get better. Our capacity for expansion and, you know, conscious evolution of ourselves is one of the, you know, most exciting things, I think, about being human, and it can always get better. So that's my response to people when they say those things in a workshop, and then generally after, you know, a day, that person starts to relax and be willing to share some of the things that are not as perfect as they initially thought they were. Usually it's through the group being exposed to each other's stories, and there's a lot of compassion and empathy in the room, and so then people are able to offer that compassion and empathy to themselves and to see, oh yeah, there's that little part of me that, you know. And a way to explain the mechanism of imprinting is the analogy of the elephant. So let's say there is an elephant baby born into the circus, and, you know, nobody's got time to look after him, so they tie him up in the circus area. They tie him up, and he remains there, and he, you know, gets walked around on this rope and then tied back up again, and he tries to get away a little bit, but he can't, and so on. that elephant grows up to be an enormous creature that could easily pull that rope and that peg out of the ground and do whatever they like. But they don't. You see, there are big elephants tied up with a simple rope, and it is the mechanism of imprinting that has done that. They don't try to pull that peg out of the ground because they have internalized the belief that they can't. Likewise, it's very often in children's comics and things that little baby ducks will imprint that the first person or thing that they see is their mother, and that it's not always the case. So that's another example for you to understand how the mechanism of imprinting works. And, you know, it's pretty wonderful that we can do something about it. And it's just about knowing and understanding, you know, the subtleties of how we open or contract to help someone to slowly open up and invite in a new experience for themselves. Intention is very important. So when people say, oh, you know, can I bring my friend to a workshop? I generally prefer that people choose to do this work themselves. We do see partners who are often brought along to workshops that they didn't choose to be at, but the birthing woman is doing the course and she wants her partner there. And sometimes that person knows absolutely nothing about what they're doing until they get there. And they're the ones who will say things generally like, oh, but I had a fabulous childhood and I don't need anything, thanks. Just look after them, everyone else. But yeah, as long as they soften and let go over time, then they will also get something from the experience. Recapitulation, so reenactment of imprints, and how that plays out. So we see that a lot in birth as well, where sometimes the birthing team might actually be bringing their imprints to the fore and enacting energetic patterns. You know, like everything was fine, but then there was a drama and, you know, we had to rush off, and or just generally, you know, fears around what can happen, and time, you know, the relationship to time is also a big one that comes into play at birth. But recapitulation of imprints doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be an opportunity, just like an argument between good friends can be an opportunity for further growth. So too can the activation of an imprint be an opportunity to choose something else, to see and recognize and understand, that's my imprint of helplessness. Look how it's just kicked in out of nowhere. And to then go, okay, well, when you see and you know that that's your imprint, you don't have to follow it. You don't have to fall into that path. So, and you can actively choose something else that gives you a big sort of healing experience. That's what we do in our workshops in a contrived way, but sometimes it happens out there in the real world as well. And when a pattern is playing out again and again, sometimes that in itself is the catalyst for change. It is the catalyst for a woman to say, like, you know, let's say she's seeing the doctor throughout her pregnancy, and each time that she sees him, she has a list of questions, but then she just doesn't feel brave enough or courageous enough to ask her questions. And if that happens, enough times, that she can go, I want to ask my questions. I don't know why I feel so disempowered when I'm in that room. Why don't I feel like I can ask? And that might be the key, that she needs to do further inquiry and to find her voice, which is a life skill necessary in pregnancy and birth, mothering, and in general life. When we are doing this kind of internal work as preparation for birth, it is no doubt going to also have an amazing impact on your mothering. So when you release repetitive patterns of either, perceiving the world in a painful way, feeling defensive or distrustful, like I said, struggling to find your voice, struggling to contribute in the way that you want to, whatever any of the ailments might be that are holding you back in life, that are holding you back in birth, would potentially continue to play out in your parenting. And so it's wonderful to address this stuff either in pregnancy or beforehand, so that you can go on to become the parent that you want to be. So there's the internal reference systems that I mentioned earlier, where if you don't have I don't think systems is the right word, internal reference points. When you don't have those internal reference points yourself, it can be a struggle to give that to your children. So doing this kind of inner work and limbic imprint recoding to, find your voice, release your pain, be as powerful as you can be, it is extremely useful on the parenting journey. It is extremely useful to be able to feel safe in the world when you are giving that to another. So we're talking about, propensity to stress, anxiety, and so on, which all has a very, very big impact on a newborn baby. Because in the same way that you absorbed everything from your mother, your child is going to absorb everything from you. And so the safer and more trusting and more relaxed that you can be, then the more, as a birthing mother, as a breastfeeding mother, all through your parenting journey, actually, that is going to have a flow-on effect to your children, without doubt. So that's another reason why. But the problem is that once you're already a mother, it's actually quite hard to find the time and space to do that kind of inner work. So doing it while you're pregnant, even if the birth itself is not your only priority, but the following years as well, is a really good thing to do, because there's precious little time afterwards. And it basically, releasing all that pain, releasing distrust and things like that, it frees up your energy. It gives you a lot more space to be playful and loving and kind, and to enjoy life, to be able to perceive beauty and to be with beauty and allow flow. It's, working with the limbic system is a very, very generous gift in pregnancy, preconception, early parenting, the whole lot. And I think Gabor Mate that said this quote, that healing is the realization that we are not what happened to us. We are much bigger and more complex than that. It's about how what happened to us was dealt with. And so the idea is that we can now give ourselves healing experiences that we did not receive, that we would like to receive, and also unlock our ability to give that to our children. So I completely and utterly believe that we can heal our history. We can discover, the absolute richness of who we are and work through the different ways that it impacted us. We are here to learn and release it with love. And I also strongly, strongly believe that not only is limbic imprint recoding a very, very useful tool for preparing for conception or pregnancy or birth, but it's also just an amazing gift for humankind. So many of our groups have pregnant women, birth workers who want to learn these skills to share with their clients, who want to work with any of their own imprints that they are still carrying around birth, in order to, enter a birthing woman's field as clean and as clear as possible. And we get people from all categories and all walks of life and all different places on the procreation journey. And speaking about midwives and birth workers and them releasing their imprints, we all know how many birth workers there are out there that had, difficult birth experiences, and that difficult birth experience is what informs them wanting to become a midwife. Again and again you hear that phrase, I want to make sure that what happened to me never happens to another woman. And that is such a beautiful sentiment. And the imprints of birth that woman is carrying, not just from her own birth, but then her birth of her babies and the lens through which she's then seen any subsequent births, that kind of person is a prime candidate for actually recoding their imprints. It's a wonderful thing to do, to be able to inform your nervous system, bypassing the cortex, bypassing the thinking mind, and going more into, the spirit and the soul, the deep connection with pleasurable, natural, physiological, intervention-free, blissful birth when one has invited that in. When one is inviting that imprint into the body. It's a beautiful antidote to whatever somebody may have experienced in their own either entry to life or birth of their babies. So I do like talking about it to birth workers and midwives, because as much as their intention is very altruistic, it could also be the case that there are some, shadows of fear and inhibition and distrust of birth that are still in their field. So it's wonderful to be able to clear that. So on one level, I hope I've answered some questions about the limbic imprint and the ways that it influences our experiences of pregnancy, conception, birth, early parenting. And I also hope I've ignited some questions and that you are now thinking about your birth. How was I born? What was my mother's experience? What was life like in my country at that time? What were my early years like? If you were present at birth as a child, how did that influence you and your memories? These are the questions that it's really important to ask when we're approaching birth, either as a birthing woman or as a birth worker or support person, midwife. So I hope this has sparked some interest for you and that you feel a little bit more clear about what the limbic imprint is all about and how it can help in the pregnancy journey. If there are more questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and please peruse the birthintobeing.com website, where there is plenty of information, articles, videos, things like that that will keep you entertained for hours. We have a Spotify channel where there's numerous podcasts that myself or Elena Tanetti Vladimirova have been interviewed and talked on various aspects around limbic imprint recoding and birth imprints. And where else can you find us? Instagram, Facebook. Many blessings.